Captain Jai-Ho Park stood at the window of Earth Space Station 3, looking at the stars. It was supposed to be a normal day of meeting with friendly alien species. Instead, a massive dark ship appeared in Earth's orbit without warning. "Sir, the ship is 3 times bigger than our largest battleship," said Officer Sun Hai-Kang. Her hand shook as she handed him the report tablet. "Our sensors show it's a Ravager vessel." Jai-Ho felt his mouth go dry. Everyone knew about the Ravagers. They were the most feared species in the known galaxy. Tall, powerful, with sharp teeth and claws, they had conquered 12 star systems in the past 50 years. "How many ships do we have ready to defend Earth?" Jai-Ho asked. 25 ships, sir. But based on past records, the Ravagers can destroy them all in less than an hour." Jai-Ho walked to the main control room. Emergency lights flashed red, and people ran back and forth between computer stations. On the big screen, the Ravager ship looked like a giant black arrow pointing at Earth. "Captain, they're sending us a message," called out Communications Officer Taiwan Choi. His voice was steady, but his face was pale. "Play it," Jai-Ho ordered. A deep, thundering voice filled the room. It reminded Jai-Ho of rolling stones and crashing waves. "Humans of Earth, we are the Ravagers. We have studied your species from afar. Now we wish to meet. You will send your best representative to discuss terms." The message ended. Everyone in the control room looked at Jai-Ho. "Terms usually means surrender," Sun Hai whispered. "That's what happened to the other planets." Jai-Ho walked to his chair and sat down. He remembered his grandfather's words from long ago. Sometimes the biggest threats come with the biggest opportunities. "Sir, what should we do?" Taiwan asked. "The military wants to attack first." Jai-Ho shook his head. "No, fighting would mean certain death for millions. The Ravagers are giving us a chance to talk. That's different from their usual approach." He pressed the communication button. "This is Captain Jai-Ho Park of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. We accept your request for a meeting. Please allow us 6 hours to prepare our welcome." The reply came quickly. "You have 3 hours." Jai-Ho stood up and straightened his uniform. "Sun Hai, I need you to find everything we know about Ravager customs. Taiwan, prepare the neutral meeting room on level 5. And someone get me the best cultural expert we have on staff." "But sir," Sun Hai protested, "they're predators. They eat other species. How can we negotiate with them?" "They're intelligent predators," Jai-Ho corrected. "They built ships that can cross galaxies. They have culture and rules. That means they can be reasoned with." As his team rushed to prepare, Jai-Ho looked at Earth through the window. The blue planet spun peacefully below, its people still going about their daily lives. Most of them didn't know that their fate might depend on what happened in the next few hours. "Whatever you are," he said quietly to the massive black ship, "whatever you want, we'll find a way to understand each other. We have to." The emergency lights continued to flash, but Jai-Ho felt strangely calm. In 3 hours, he would either start a process that would save Earth, or he would fail and watch his world fall to the galaxy's most feared predators. He touched the small wooden tea box his grandmother had given him, which he always kept in his pocket for good luck. It was a habit he had never grown out of. Little did he know that this simple box would soon play a crucial role in humanity's future. Hae Nul Kim was preparing tea in his small shop when the government cars arrived. He watched through his window as 3 black vehicles stopped outside. The morning sun had barely risen over Seoul, and the street was quiet. "Master Kim," a man in a dark suit said as he entered the shop, "you need to come with us. Earth needs your help." Hanul looked at the half-finished tea ceremony he was preparing. "I am just a tea master. What could Earth need from me?" "Captain Park requested you specifically," the man said. "It's about the Ravagers." Hanul had seen the news about the alien ship. Everyone had. The huge black shape in the sky had been visible even during daylight for the past day. 20 minutes later, Newell sat in a military helicopter with his old wooden tea box in his lap. Inside were his most precious tools, passed down through 5 generations of his family. The Ravagers arrived yesterday, explained Officer Sun Hai Kang, who sat next to him. Captain Park thinks we need someone who understands ceremony and tradition. He says you're the best tea master in Korea. Newell remembered Jai-ho Park. The captain had visited his tea shop many times before becoming a space diplomat. And how does the captain think tea will help with alien predators? He says the Ravagers care about ceremony as much as they care about hunting. Son, he said, but most people think this is a waste of time. The helicopter landed at the space elevator base. Newell had never been in space before. As the elevator carried them up to the station, he watched Earth get smaller below them. Are you afraid? Son, he asked. No, Newell said, touching his tea box. Tea ceremony is about finding peace in chaos. It has survived wars, invasions, and changes for thousands of years. Perhaps it can survive aliens too. When they reached the station, Jai-ho was waiting for them. He looked tired but smiled when he saw Newell. Master Kim, thank you for coming, Jai-ho said, bowing deeply. We have 1 hour before the Ravagers arrive for the first meeting. Tell me what you know about them, Newell said as they walked through the station. They're 3 meters tall. They have sharp teeth and claws. But they also have strict rules about eating. They perform rituals before and after every meal. They respect precision and ceremony. They entered a large room with windows looking out into space. One side had been set up like a traditional tea room, with low tables and cushions. This is crazy, a military officer said, watching Newell unpack his tea tools. They're killers, not guests for a tea party. Every creature that eats understands ritual, Newell said calmly, arranging his cups. Even predators have their ceremonies. Jai-ho nodded. The Ravagers have never attacked a species without first meeting them. They respect strength, but they also respect tradition. Maybe we can show them both. Newell picked up his grandmother's old tea whisk. Its bamboo tines were worn smooth from years of use. In the tea ceremony, we create a sacred space. For a brief time, nothing exists except the harmony between host, guest, and tea. Perhaps even alien predators can understand this peace. The station's warning lights began to flash. They're here, Sun Hai announced. Newell straightened his traditional hanbok and began heating the water. As he waited for it to reach the perfect temperature, he heard heavy footsteps approaching, much heavier than any humans. Whatever happens, Jai-ho said quietly, thank you for trying. Newell continued his preparations, moving with practiced calm. Sometimes, he said, the most important thing is to simply prepare the tea and trust that understanding will follow. The door slid open. The Ravager who entered first was so tall that it had to duck under the doorframe. Its scales were dark blue, almost black, and its eyes glowed amber in the station's light. Behind it came 2 more Ravagers, their claws clicking softly on the metal floor. Newell continued preparing the tea, his hands steady. He could feel the Ravagers watching his every move. The first Ravager spoke, its voice deep like thunder. I am Voice of Storm, Chief Diplomat of the Ravager Fleet. It turned to look at Jai-ho. You offer us a ceremony instead of weapons. Interesting. Jai-ho bowed deeply. We believe understanding starts with sharing customs. He gestured to Newell. This is Master Kim, one of our most respected tea masters. Voice of Storm moved closer to watch Newell's hands as he measured the tea powder. The Ravager's head tilted slightly, showing interest in the precise movements. You measure with great care, Voice of Storm said, like we measure the steps of our hunting dance. Newell looked up at the massive alien. Every measure must be perfect, he said calmly. Too much or too little would spoil a harmony. The Ravager made a sound that might have been a laugh. We say the same about the killing bite. Too deep or too shallow ruins the honor of the hunt. Young Ni Li, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward with her datapad. "If I may," she said, "I've noticed something interesting. The way you watch Master Kim's movements matches how your species tracks prey. But you're not preparing to attack. You're learning." Voice of Storm turned its amber eyes to young Mei. "You are observant, small one. Yes, we study all patterns. In hunting, in war, and now, in peace." Hanul began to whisk the tea, creating a perfect green foam on top. The Ravagers watched the movement with complete focus, their claws opening and closing slowly. "The sound of your whisk," one of the other Ravagers said. "It is like the wing beats of the ghost prey on our home world. We hunt them in the sacred seasons." "Everything in the ceremony has meaning," Hanul explained. "The sound of the whisk represents the wind in pine trees. The color of the tea is like the first leaves of spring." Voice of Storm moved even closer, watching as Hanul lifted the first bowl of tea. "You offer us drink when we could kill you all. You maintain perfect form when you should shake with fear. This is strength. Different from what we know, but strength still." Hanul held up the bowl with both hands, offering it to Voice of Storm. The room grew very quiet. Everyone knew that Ravagers were meat-eaters. No one knew if they could even drink tea. Voice of Storm carefully took the bowl in its clawed hands, copying Hanul's respectful grip perfectly. The Ravager lifted the bowl to its face and breathed in the steam. "Ah," Voice of Storm said softly. "It smells like the victory herbs we burn after a successful hunt." The Ravager took a small sip, being careful not to break the delicate bowl with its sharp teeth. Its eyes widened slightly. "The taste," Voice of Storm said. "It is not food, but it is peaceful, like watching the stars after a long hunt." Hanul began preparing the second bowl. Tea ceremony teaches us that peace can be found in small moments, shared between people who choose to find harmony together. Voice of Storm looked at its empty bowl, then at Hanul. "Perhaps," it said slowly, "we have been hunting the wrong things. Tell us more about this harmony." Over the next 3 days, Hanul worked with young Mei to study the Ravagers' movements. They sat in the observation room, watching recordings of Voice of Storm and the other Ravagers during the first tea ceremony. "Look at how they hold their claws," young Mei said, pointing to the screen. "It's exactly like your hand positions during the ceremony." Hanul nodded. They understand the importance of precise movement. Now we need to adapt the ceremony to match their physical needs. Jai-Ho entered the room carrying new tea bowls. These were larger and stronger than traditional ones, made specially for Ravager hands. "The craftsmen worked all night to make these," he said. "They used reinforced ceramic that won't break under Ravager's strength." Hanul picked up one of the new bowls. It was beautiful, with dark blue swirls that matched Ravager scales. "Perfect. Now we need to adjust the serving height and movements." Young Mei checked her data about Ravager biology. Their sense of smell is 5 times stronger than ours, and they can detect heat patterns like snakes do. "We should use this." Hanul thought for a moment. "Then we will make the steam patterns part of the ceremony. The heat and scent will tell a story they can understand." They spent hours practicing the new movements. Hanul had to learn to serve tea at chest height for the tall Ravagers. Young Mei helped design a new table that could handle their weight. Voice of Storm visited each day to observe their work. The Ravager diplomat seemed fascinated by their efforts to combine both cultures. "You change your ancient ceremony for us," Voice of Storm said. "Some would see this as weakness." Hanul looked up at the towering alien. "A tree that cannot bend and the wind will break. True strength comes from adapting while keeping your core principles." Voice of Storm made a deep humming sound that they had learned meant approval. "We too have changed our hunting rituals over time. Each new prey teaches us new ways." That evening, they tested the new ceremony. Hanul wore his formal handbok, but now it included dark blue patterns that matched Ravager markings. The new tea room combined Earth and Ravager designs. The steam from the tea rose in careful patterns, telling a story of peace in a language of heat and scent that the Ravagers could read. The new bowls fit perfectly in their clawed hands. The ceremony now honors both our ways, Hay Newell explained as he served the tea. The steam tells the story of hunters finding wisdom in peace. The bowls show strength and beauty working together. Voice of Storm performed the new movements perfectly, matching Hay Newell's grace despite its massive size. "We see the hunt in your ceremony now," the Ravager said. "Not for blood, but for understanding." Young Mai watched their vital signs on her datapad. The Ravager's stress hormones dropped significantly during the ceremony. She whispered to Jaiho, "Just like humans feeling calm during meditation." Jaiho smiled. Master Kim was right. They may be predators, but they understand the peace found in ritual. As the ceremony ended, Voice of Storm stood carefully, respecting the space. "Tomorrow," the Ravager announced, "we will show you one of our rituals. Perhaps it too can be a bridge between our peoples." Newell bowed deeply. "We would be honored." The morning would bring new challenges, but for now, in the quiet of the tea room, two very different species had found common ground in the space between steam and silence. The day of the formal ceremony arrived. The space station's main meeting room had been transformed. Earth's diplomats sat on one side, while the Ravager delegation waited on the other. The modified tea room stood between them like a bridge. Newell entered wearing his finest ceremonial robes. The dark blue patterns on his sleeves caught the light, matching the Ravager's scales. Voice of Storm stood at the entrance, towering over everyone but moving with careful grace. "Today," Jaiho announced, "we join two traditions. This ceremony will be recorded in both Earth and Ravager histories." Young Mi checked her instruments one last time. "The air temperature is perfect," she whispered to Hay Newell. "The steam patterns will form exactly as we planned." Newell began the ceremony with the traditional cleaning of the tea tools. Each movement was precise, measured. The Ravagers watched with complete focus, their amber eyes following his hands. Voice of Storm spoke in its deep voice. "The cleaning of tools, like our blessing of hunting claws before the great hunts." Newell nodded as he worked. "Every tool must be pure for the ceremony to have meaning." The water began to steam, rising in careful patterns that told ancient stories. The Ravagers could see the heat waves forming shapes that humans could not. Their eyes tracked the invisible tales of peace and understanding. "Clever," Voice of Storm said softly. "You speak to us in the language of heat and scent." When Hay Newell lifted the first bowl, the whole room grew quiet. This was the moment that would prove if two species could truly share a peaceful tradition. Voice of Storm stepped forward and knelt with surprising elegance. The huge Ravager's movements perfectly matched the ceremony they had practiced. Its claws held the bowl exactly as Newell had taught. "We honor the peace between hunter and wisdom seeker," Voice of Storm said, using the formal words they had created together. Newell bowed. "We honor the strength that chooses harmony over conquest." The tea ceremony continued, each step building trust between the species. The other Ravagers joined one by one, each showing perfect respect for the ritual. Young Mai watched her readings with growing excitement. "Their brain patterns," she whispered to Jaiho. "They're almost identical to humans during deep meditation." In the middle of the ceremony, Voice of Storm did something unexpected. The Ravager reached into a ceremonial pouch and pulled out a small object. It was a carved stone that glowed with soft blue light. "This is a star heart," Voice of Storm explained. "We give them only to those we consider true equals. Never before has one been given to another species." The Ravager placed the stone beside Hay Newell's tea tools. "You have shown us that strength comes in many forms. The wisdom of peace can be as powerful as the wisdom of the hunt." Newell completed the ceremony by serving the final bowl of tea. As Voice of Storm drank, the other Ravagers made a soft humming sound, their equivalent of applause. "The hunt brings food to our bodies," Voice of Storm said, "but this ceremony brings peace to our spirits. Perhaps this is what we have been hunting for across the stars." When the ceremony ended, both humans and Ravagers remained quiet for a moment, feeling the weight of what they had achieved. In a simple room on a space station, two species had found a way to move past fear and understand each other. Jai-Ho looked at the star heart glowing next to the tea bowls. "This isn't just a ceremony anymore," he said. "This is the beginning of real peace." The next morning, Voice of Storm led the human delegation to the Ravager ship. Haynul walked beside the towering alien, carrying his tea set in its wooden box. Young Mei followed with her instruments, while Jai-Ho represented Earth's diplomatic corps. The inside of the Ravager ship surprised them. Instead of the dark, threatening space they expected, the walls showed beautiful moving patterns of heat and light. The corridors were wide and tall, filled with artwork that told stories through temperature changes. "This is our Hall of Hunts," Voice of Storm explained. "But today, we will show you the ritual of peace after hunt. No other species has seen this ceremony." They entered a large circular room. The floor was covered in soft, dark material that absorbed sound. At the center stood a raised platform with various objects that glowed like the star heart. "In the old days," Voice of Storm said, "our species fought endlessly. We were consuming worlds faster than we could find them. Then we learned that the greatest victory is knowing when not to strike." The Ravager lifted one of the glowing objects. "These are memory stones. They hold the wisdom of our ancestors who chose peace over conquest." Young Miss studied her readings. "The stones emit a subtle vibration," she said. "It matches the frequency of the tea steam patterns we created." Voice of Storm began the Ravager ritual. Its movements were surprisingly gentle for such a large predator. The glowing stones moved in patterns that reminded Haynul of the way he moved his hands during tea ceremony. "After every hunt," Voice of Storm explained, "we perform this ritual to honor the balance of life. Without prey, there can be no predator. Without peace, there can be no meaningful victory." Haynul watched carefully. "Your ritual and our tea ceremony share the same heart," he said. "Both teach us to find balance." Suddenly, Young Mi made an exciting discovery. "The tea we've been serving," she said, checking her data. "It contains compounds that create a calming effect in Ravager biology, similar to their peace ritual stones." Voice of Storm made a sound of agreement. "We felt it from the first taste. Your tea speaks to our bodies as your ceremony speaks to our minds." The Ravager continued the ritual, showing how their ancestors had learned to channel their hunting instincts into art and ceremony. The glowing stones created patterns of light and heat that told stories of transformation. "We still hunt," Voice of Storm said, "but now we hunt for knowledge, for understanding, for ways to grow stronger without destroying." Haynul set up his tea equipment on a small table they had brought. As Voice of Storm completed the Ravager ritual, Haynul began preparing tea. For the first time in history, the two ceremonies merged. The steam from the tea rose to meet the light of the memory stones. The patterns they created together told a new story, one of two very different species finding common ground. "This is why we travel between stars," Voice of Storm said quietly. "Not to conquer, but to find moments like this, to learn new ways of seeing the universe." Jai-Ho watched as humans and Ravagers sat together, sharing tea and stories. "Sometimes," he said, "the bravest thing is to put aside old fears and trust in the possibility of friendship." The combined ceremony continued, creating a moment of perfect harmony between hunter and artist, predator and peacemaker, steam and starlight. The peaceful progress between humans and Ravagers faced its first real test 1 week after the combined ceremony. Haynul was preparing tea in the modified ceremony room when the station's alarms began to sound. Jai-Ho rushed into the room. "3 Ravager battleships just appeared near Earth," he said. "They're not responding to Voice of Storm's commands." Young Mi checked her communications screen. "They're led by Bloodseeker, a Ravager commander who opposes peace with other species." Voice of Storm entered the room, its scales darker than usual with concern. Bloodseeker believes that speaking with prey makes us weak. He wants to return to the old ways of conquest. The station shook as the new Ravager ships moved closer. On the main screen, they could see Earth's defense fleet moving to protect the planet. If either side attacks first, all our work will be destroyed, Hey Newell said quietly. He looked at his tea set, then at Voice of Storm. Perhaps we need both our ceremonies now more than ever. Voice of Storm understood immediately. The Ravager took out its memory stones while Hey Newell began preparing the tea. Together, they set up both ceremonies in the room facing Earth. Open a channel to Bloodseeker's ship, Voice of Storm ordered. Let him see what we do. On the screen, Bloodseeker appeared. The Ravager commander was larger than Voice of Storm, with battle scars across his scales. What is this weakness? He demanded. Watch and learn, old friend, Voice of Storm said. See how these humans have found a different kind of strength. Newell began the tea ceremony while Voice of Storm performed the ritual of peace after hunt. The steam and light patterns filled the room, telling their story of harmony. You perform prey rituals. Bloodseeker's voice was angry. You shame our warrior heritage. No, Voice of Storm replied calmly. I honor our heritage by finding new ways to grow stronger. The humans have taught us that true power comes in many forms. Young Mai spoke up, her voice steady despite her fear. Your scans must show how the tea ceremony affects Ravager biology. It creates the same peace state as your ritual stones. This isn't weakness. It's science proving that our species can work together. Bloodseeker watched silently as the combined ceremony continued. The patterns of steam and light grew more complex, showing the story of predator and prey finding a better way. Your ancestors created the peace ritual because they saw that endless hunting would destroy us. Voice of Storm said to Bloodseeker. Now we have found others who understand this wisdom. Will you destroy that with violence? Newell lifted a tea bowl. In our ceremony, we say that the host and guest become one in the sharing of tea. Would you join us, Commander Bloodseeker? Would you at least see what we have discovered before you judge it? The station was quiet except for the soft sounds of brewing tea and humming memory stones. Everyone waited for Bloodseeker's response. After what seemed like forever, Bloodseeker spoke. I will come and see this ceremony. But if I find only weakness, there will be war. Voice of Storm nodded. That is fair. Sometimes, the greatest courage is in being willing to learn new ways. As they prepared for Bloodseeker's arrival, Hey Newell said quietly to Jio, now we will truly test if tea and ceremony can bridge the gap between war and peace. Jack walked through the busy city streets, thinking about his next move. He knew the key to finding the lost treasure was somewhere in the journal he held tightly in his hands. The old, weathered pages contained clues left by his grandfather, an adventurer who had spent his life searching for the legendary riches. As Jack turned the corner, he spotted a small cafe. Feeling hungry and needing a place to sit and examine the journal more closely, he decided to stop in for a quick bite. The bell on the door jingled as he entered the cozy shop. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm muffins made Jack's stomach growl. He sat down at a small table by the window and ordered a coffee and blueberry muffin from the friendly waitress. As he waited for his food, Jack opened up the old journal and began to read. He flipped through the fragile pages, trying to decipher his grandfather's messy handwriting and the mysterious symbols scattered throughout the book. One particular page caught Jack's eye. It had a rough sketch of a mountain range with a series of numbers and letters scrawled along the bottom. Jack realized this must be some sort of code or coordinates. He grabbed a napkin and pen and began to jot down the cryptic sequence, determined to crack the code. As he wrote, Jack suddenly felt like he was being watched. He glanced up and noticed a man in a dark coat sitting a few tables away. The man was reading a newspaper, but his eyes kept darting over in Jack's direction. Jack tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, telling himself he was just being paranoid. He turned his attention back to the journal. Just then, the waitress returned with Jack's coffee and muffin. Grateful for the distraction, Jack thanked her and took a big bite of the warm, fluffy muffin. As he chewed, he continued to examine the page with the mountain sketch. He turned the journal sideways and upside down, trying to make sense of the strange markings. Suddenly, Jack heard a loud commotion coming from outside the cafe. He turned to look out the window and saw two police officers chasing after a man down the street. As the officers ran by, Jack noticed the man they were pursuing was wearing a dark coat, just like the suspicious man in the cafe. Jack's heart began to race as he quickly gathered up his things. He threw some cash on the table to cover his bill and hurried out the door. As he stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, he glanced up and down the street, looking for any sign of the man in the dark coat. But the mysterious stranger was nowhere to be seen. With a growing sense of unease, Jack decided it was time to leave the city. He needed to find a quiet, safe place where he could examine his grandfather's journal more carefully and figure out his next steps. He hailed a taxi and jumped in, giving the driver instructions to head towards the mountain range depicted in the sketch. As the taxi wove through the city traffic and merged onto the highway heading out of town, Jack settled back into his seat. He pulled out the journal again, running his fingers over the worn leather cover. He knew in his heart that his grandfather's final quest was now his own. No matter what challenges or dangers lay ahead, Jack was determined to follow the clues, crack the code, and find the lost treasure. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Jack was ready for whatever adventure lay ahead. With his grandfather's journal as his guide and a thirst for discovery in his heart, he knew he would stop at nothing to unravel the mystery and claim the legendary riches that had eluded his family for generations.